You are.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massey, and I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research here at the University of Saskatchewan. And today we have with us a special guest. So just to give you a little bit of background, the session today is actually hosted by the Science Research and Society Club. So this is a more of a social club, social and learning club. That was developed by Vaidehi Lanki, and Vaidehi can tell you a little bit more about, I'm sorry about the sounds coming in on the side there. I'm supposed to be in another meeting that I said no to, but apparently they still want me there, but too bad. So the SURE program that I run here at the University of Saskatchewan is the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. And it's for students who are interested in research. So students who might be taking a capstone class or an honors class, or maybe they're doing some summer undergraduate research, or they're taking a FIRE class, a first-year research experience class, or they're just generally interested in research and developing something new that didn't exist before. And so as part of this SURE program, Vaidehi has set up the Science Research and Society Club, and SRS Club has been meeting for about the last 18 months, roughly, most Fridays. And oftentimes we get guest speakers, and that is what is happening today. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Vaidehi, who will speak to what's going to be happening today.
Great, thanks, Meryl. This is really exciting. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the last Friday of the term. We hope you're safe and sound. It's slippery conditions outside. So we're very excited to have Jaclyn McLean from the U of S Library with us today. Imposter syndrome is something that we've touched upon in our various conversations, and we're really excited to learn from Jaclyn about what imposter syndrome is, how to recognize it, and what are strategies to tackle it. These are questions that I think that as young people in science and research and exploring spaces that we might not always feel are built for us, are questions that do come up. And with that, Jaclyn, will hand it off to you, and then we'll have questions and conversation afterwards. So if something comes up that you're really excited to ask, maybe note it down, and we'll do that after the presentation. So thank you so much, Jaclyn, for joining us today.
Awesome, thanks. So first, I want to start by thanking Vaidehi and Merle for inviting me here today, for finding my blog post from 5 years ago and thinking that I had something to say. I'm really looking forward to a conversation. I'm going to present for about 15 minutes or so, and then we're going to be able to have a really great conversation, I hope, about imposter syndrome. So I'm ready for my next slide. So what's the plan for today? Here we go. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to dive right in. And we'll cover all of those things and then move on to the most important part of today, our conversation. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Jaclyn McLean. I am the electronic resources librarian at University of Saskatchewan. Right now I'm on sabbatical, which means I'm focusing on my research, which has really been a great year. I'm back to my usual duties in January. So I am a librarian who manages all the electronic resources, which means I negotiate and manage all the licenses and contracts that go with all of those online journals that you use when you're doing your research. It's also my team that helps keep them online and fixes things when they break. That's the big picture view of my job. Aside from being a librarian, I'm also a tea drinker, a knitter, a cat owner. These are my two cats. You may see them today, hard to say. And sometimes I'm also an imposter. So next slide, please. So I started looking into imposter syndrome in 2015. That's the same year that I was appointed as a tenure track librarian who was expected to do research all of a sudden. Research, what could little old me know or do about research that would even matter? I had taken one research methods class in my master's degree, and I hadn't taken a real math class since high school because my undergrad was in humanities and I was able to do word math. So to me, research meant curing cancer, developing mathematical algorithms to understand black holes, looking into the human impacts of climate change, developing new vaccines. Those kinds of things were research. So I understood research in the context of when I was a student, which meant I could read lots of things that other smart people had said and put them together into a paper. But that couldn't be enough now that I was actually a faculty member, right? Next slide, please. So in that time, I consistently made comments about my own lack of ability. I talked to anyone who would listen about when would I feel like a real researcher? What would make me feel like a real researcher and not a fake? So these feelings are really common among human beings, but they also make us feel alone. And I'll tell you that acceptance of my own value as a researcher really began when I had a conversation with a really smart woman that I work with, who told me that research is really just about asking a question and then looking for an answer. That's it. It's so simple. So I started my research journey with the question of, why don't I feel like a real researcher? Why do I feel like a fraud? Next slide. So I started looking into imposter syndrome, sometimes called imposter phenomenon. The term was coined by clinical psychologists Clance and Immis in 1978 to describe psychological patterns of behavior where people persistently believe that they are unworthy of success and they are frauds who have managed to deceive everyone around them despite a lot of evidence to the contrary. They initially focused their research on high-achieving women, but in the ensuing 50 years, a gender difference has been disproved in this phenomenon. Clance talks about experiencing imposter syndrome in grad school. Oh, it's fine. When she would experience the feelings before writing an exam and focus on her fear of failing and focus on all the things she didn't know instead of what she did know. So obviously she must be incompetent. So in those last 50 years, as I've mentioned, there is lots of research out there about imposter syndrome. They focused on many different populations like students, women, men, leaders, academics, nurses, librarians, you name it. Someone has done a study on how imposter syndrome affects a group of people or a profession. So in spite of evidence that proves their capabilities, people who suffer from imposter syndrome continue to think of themselves as frauds and undeserving or not worthy of what they attained. And there's, like I said, a lot of research. This is a teeny tiny little tip of the iceberg of a few articles that I found. In the 1980s, John Harvey and Cynthia Katz outlined 3 signs to recognize when you're experiencing imposter syndrome. And I've added some more at the end from more recent research, but we'll start with these 3 core signs. So next slide. The first one is believing that you have fooled others into overestimating your abilities. The second one is that all of your success is due to external factors other than your ability or your intelligence. It's luck, you worked really hard that time, oh, you were charismatic and you fooled them. The evaluator didn't know what they were looking at. They misjudged things. That's, it's not actually that I'm good. It's that, they don't know any better. And the third one is fearing exposure as an imposter or that you won't be able to live up to expectations. Just give a quick minute so you can read that little comic. Okay, so the additional ones that have been added in research in the ensuing years, so we can go to the next slide, include things about obstacles we build for ourselves when we're feeling like imposters. Common ones include sabotaging our own success, feeling a fear of that success, crippling self-doubt, maybe not so crippling, but like serious self-doubt, and also overachieving or striving obsessively for perfection. It can also cause people to second guess their work and hesitate to stand up for themselves or share their opinions because they believe they are not good enough. And the negative effects of all of these behaviors should be clear. When you're working really hard to try not to be exposed as a fake, sorry, lost my spot, then you work harder than you need to. And you might also avoid talking about those feelings and feel alone because you don't ever want to be exposed. So I'm here to tell you today that you are not alone. If you have ever felt anything like this ever, some of them, all of them, even just one of them, research indicates that over 70% of people experience feelings of imposter syndrome at some point in their lives or their careers. And these feelings of inadequacy persist even in the face of information that says the opposite. Those nagging thoughts of self-doubt and intellectual fraudulence are very common. So when I think about those feelings and thoughts, I call them gremlins. They take advantage of all of your deepest doubts and your fears, and they build a narrative in your own brain about your failure or being less than, and that builds into your internal monologue. And also don't feed them after midnight, which is a gremlins joke. Just in case you don't know about gremlins, you should go look them up after. They're great. Next slide. So the person feels like they've fooled everyone into believing they're competent, and all of their success feels undeserved and is dismissed. Next slide. Imposter syndromes tend to be primarily career-based and achievement-driven. They're also very common in students. People who aren't able to own their accomplishments or value despite evidence to the contrary. And this can lead to overwork, setting higher and higher unattainable goals, and eventually to burnout. So now I'm going to give you the counterpoint. I'm not sure if anyone here has heard of the Dunning-Kruger Effect, but it tends to be talked about as a counterpoint to imposter syndrome. Whereas in imposter syndrome, there's a high level of actual ability, but a low level of perceived ability. In the Dunning-Kruger effect, those are flipped. So there is a high perceived ability, but a low actual ability. So that's also some good news for you if you've ever felt like an imposter. If you didn't, you actually feeling like an imposter is a good sign. It's the people who are truly incompetent or unable to do their work. They can't see it because they believe they could do everything. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to some strategies. And the next slide. Okay, so aside from digging into imposter syndrome and doing more research into what it was, the thing that I'm interested in is how people reduce the dissonance between their internal gremlins and the results of their work. How do you start believing your way out of imposter syndrome? So some of these strategies I've tried, some I'm still exploring. Some of them didn't work for me, but I've talked to others and they have worked for them. So they may not all feel appropriate for you, but I'm going to offer them as suggestions and hoping that we can keep talking about strategies later in our conversation. So the first strategy is remember that you are awesome. Learn to take a compliment for your work. Instead of brushing it off or talking about falling back on luck or other things, learn to say thank you and try to internalize these compliments. One concrete way that I was able to do this, because my work revolves around my email inbox, is I built a folder in my inbox called You Are Awesome. And I put all the positive feedback I got from people into that one folder. And when I had a bad day or when I wasn't feeling like I was doing a good enough job, I could look at those emails and remind myself that in the past, things had gone really well. And I just needed to keep working like I had, and things would likely continue to go well. The second one is continue to tell yourself that failure does not have to be a catastrophe. Being wrong and making mistakes isn't a bad thing most of the time. If you think about it, the best basketball players will miss most of the shots they take. Imperfection or failure does not create a disaster in most cases. This is one of the things I remind myself and the others I work with regularly. We're running a library service. We're not performing brain surgery, right? The urgency of our work and the effects, if we make a small mistake, are okay. We'll be able to handle it. The third one is talk about it. Find someone or a group of people that you can talk to about the way you're feeling. Like I talked about earlier, a lot of the things these feelings and thoughts do is make you feel alone. So finding a group of people or a couple of people that you can talk to and be honest with will really help you acknowledge those feelings and also help you recognize that you are not alone. It's important though that those people are honest with you, that they will pump you up, but also be honest when things maybe aren't working out and you need to work through something with them. The next one is get some perspective. Your success may be like a Monet painting. Up close, it looks like a bunch of wild brushstrokes and blobs that just don't make any sense. But from the distance, the true beauty and the value is revealed. Don't think of your success in the context of all of the other things you haven't finished yet, or that went wrong, or may never do. You have to celebrate everything that goes well and value it. Something that can help with this is to find a mantra or a positivity statement that helps you refocus when those feelings of inadequacy get too big, or find something that just helps you get out of your own head, like a silly YouTube or TikTok video. One of my favorites to look for is baby goats in sweaters and pajamas, because they sometimes get too cold and need to wear clothes. It is adorable. The next one is that caring is a good thing. Find some strength in your commitment and your belief in your work. If you didn't care, you wouldn't worry so much about succeeding. And this might be the most important thing that I've learned, that you can't feel like an imposter if you don't care. Caring is a strength. However, finding the balance between that caring and paralyzing perfectionism is one I haven't solved yet. I will admit that. The next strategy is write it down. Identify your thoughts, sit down and write down your biggest fears, the most ridiculous beliefs, and the biggest frauds about yourself. You can write gibberish. Externalize the thoughts that you're feeling can give you perspective, and sometimes seeing it in writing can lessen their power. Make a list of your feelings and work on them. You can also, if there's a big task that seems insurmountable, break it down into bite-sized pieces that feel more achievable. Writing down your fears will help you realize that they're maybe not that reasonable. And even if they feel reasonable, add a velociraptor or something completely out of left field to that fear to help your brain recognize that it's much less likely to happen than the path to succeeding. And my last strategy is sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it. Use neuroplasticity, right? Smiling can make you feel happier. So fake it and act confident and start shaping your brain by pretending, because inside you really do know what you're doing. It's about convincing your brain to realize it. Okay, so we'll go look at all the strategies in review. So we have one slide that has them all listed there. And these are just the few that I've identified. There are lots more out there. There are lots of research that has been done specifically just on strategies. So if this is an area that you're interested in, a bit of internet searching can give you probably an overwhelming amount of things you can try. So like I said, there are lots of things on the internet about imposter syndromes. I'm now going to show you a few of my favorites. Next slide. Yes, everyone probably has imposter syndrome that you think is awesome. Next. Meta imposter syndrome. Next. This one I like. It really flips it on its head. Okay, next. So like I said, the best and most reassuring thing that I've read as I've working through my own feelings is that imposter syndrome is associated with highly achieving, highly successful people who are passionate about whatever it is that bring those feelings bubbling up. It's not about low self-esteem. It's not about someone who is successful but worries they're not deserving of that success. It's about finding a way to ride the egomania, as Tina Fey says. Next slide. Even Einstein now is attributed of experiencing imposter syndrome. Of course, it didn't exist as a syndrome when he was alive, but a lot of his success came early in life. And this is a quote from a conversation he had with a friend late in his life. Next slide. Okay, bottom line, people who feel like they're imposters when they aren't are actually passionate about their work or wherever the feelings are coming from, and they care about the outcomes. It is a sign of strength and that you're keeping perspective on your own abilities. It's just important to not let it take over and lead you down the road to burnout. Next slide. So I'm going to do a little tiny aside about burnout. I've read a lot of research about imposter syndrome, its incidence among high achievers, and especially in academia. But one of the things that helped me recognize it and develop the skills that I need for it is this book, Burnout, by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, and their podcast, The Feminist Survival Project. Because imposter syndrome doesn't act alone. It happens in the context of everything else we deal with in this post-industrialist, capitalist, patriarchal world that we live in every day. So I recommend the Nagoski sisters' work to everyone because it is essential for understanding stress cycles and burnout. It's evidence-based and also humorous. So if you're looking for some light reading over the break, maybe this is it. No, read fiction, or don't read, take a break. Okay, my final thought, next slide. I'm going to wrap it up with some good news, bad news for all of you. The bad news, you may never recover from imposter syndrome. I felt a really hefty dose of it as I prepared these slides for all of you, thinking, who am I for thinking I know enough about imposter syndrome to come and talk to you all? But the good news is that I've got my strategies. I reminded myself that I know enough. I have my own experience and I've done research into this, and that sharing vulnerability can be a strength. That I may not be a psychology researcher, but I am someone who has experienced imposter syndrome and isn't afraid to talk about it. I think of imposter syndrome now, not as a distinct thing that goes away, but something cyclical, something that I will experience, identify, react to, and resolve. And then I'll try something new and I'll experience it again and go through the process. And I have found over the last 5 or 6 years that the better I get at identifying it, the better the rest of the cycle goes too. And sometimes I even go through it somewhat unconsciously. Not always, but sometimes. And on the next slide, I've just got my contact information there for you. If today's conversation leaves you with questions and you want to talk about it some more, please feel free to reach out and get in touch. Or if you have questions about the library and you haven't been able to ask them from someone, please go ahead and reach out. I have some great colleagues and I will connect you with the people who can show you how to work the printers, because it is not me. So thank you so much. And I cannot wait for our conversation.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation and so much to take away from.